In today's episode, we are discussing the joy of reinventing yourself, taking ownership of your art, your voice, and your presence. My name is Kristen Ruiz, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. Geneva Main, and our beautiful guest for today, Ms. Harolyn Blackwell. Oh, and don't forget to follow and subscribe to our channels on Instagram, YouTube, and your favorite podcast platform. And drop us a note and let us know what you'd love to hear more about at info@theagenticvoice.org. So let me introduce you to Ms. Harolyn Blackwell, if you haven't yet been acquainted with her work. Following the study at the Catholic University of America in her native Washington, D.C., Harolyn Blackwell's performing career began on the Broadway stage in Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story. Her transition from musical theater to opera occurred shortly afterwards when she was selected as a finalist for the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions. Since that time, Ms. Blackwell has performed with many of the major national and international opera companies and at festivals around the world, including Lyric Opera of Chicago, Glyndebourne Festival, Teatro Colón de Buenos Aires, San Francisco Opera, the Netherlands Opera, Seattle Opera, Opera de Nice, Miami Opera, Canadian Opera Company, Aix-en-Provence Festival, Opera Orchestra of New York, New York's Mostly Mozart Festival, and the Ravinia Festival, among others. Ms. Blackwell is currently involved in a number of projects, both teaching and singing in the New York metro area. So Harolyn, it is so lovely to have you on for today.
Thank you so much for having me. Both of you, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Amazing.
Before we get into hearing all about your wonderful career, we usually start our podcast with our first segment, What's New and What's Good. And basically, we just talk about what we'd like to share with our listeners about our personal or professional lives. So for me, I'm really enjoying spending time cooking. I'm trying out a lot of vegan recipes.
Wonderful.
You know?
Ooh, we're gonna talk.
Brava. Okay.
Yes. And I'm enjoying it. Like, since I'm not so pressed now, it's like enjoyable. And I just feel, I know, like a regular Martha Stewart. I'm really loving it.
In other words, Martha Stewart better watch out.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Totally enjoying it.
Bravo. Excellent. Excellent.
And what about you, Harolyn? What's new and what's good?
I think, what's new and what's good is that just working on several projects, as so stated in my bio. I'm trying to get those in line. And I was just saying, it's interesting. A neighbor asked me recently, she said, so what's happening? What's wonderful? What's great happening in your life? And I said, I got up this morning. I'm grateful for that. I've lost several friends this week. And so, it's just, that's my happiness. Just another day. And to find out something new and exciting, and like today, being here with both of you. That's great.
And how about you, Kristen? What's new and what's good?
I decided, I've got a couple things on my plate that have been feeling very heavy, and each one is good, but they were feeling weighted as I was living in them. And I'm like, do I really want to do another year of just feeling like it's pedal to the metal in terms of, getting things done? But I didn't want to stop them. These are moving in the direction I want to go. So what I decided is to really incorporate the idea of delight and try and find delight throughout my day and find delight in the projects that I'm working on. I've been working on my dissertation for a while. Chapter 4, I swore was gonna kill me. And I stopped and said, you know what? As I'm looking at this amazing, actually, I'm excited to share some of it. But as I'm working on this research, there are so many opportunities for delight, for beauty, to see. And so rather than trying to just see it as more stuff to do, how can I really absorb all the joy that there is? And so I've been doing that. I've been taking care of my plants, the work for my business, just really looking to slow down in the moment. And Geneva, I'm with you. I've been playing around with vegan recipes for a couple months now, and I've been really enjoying it. I make my own cheese now. I made my own butter. I made my own
wow.
and it's so easy, and it's cheap.
People have like a lot of pushback about vegetarianism, veganism, because it's like bland or whatever. I realized that a lot of the flavor from food comes from vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's not low on flavor at all. You might miss the mouthfeel of meat and cheese and things like that, because that's a mouthfeel that I don't think vegetables and starches can replicate, but the flavor is pretty good.
You know, it's so funny. I remember going to Aix-en-Provence that summer, and there was a market outside of our apartment, and my roommate came back that evening and made ratatouille. And I remember sitting there going, "Oh my goodness, the vegetables. I have forgotten what vegetables it tasted like because they were really from a garden, from a farm that was just taken directly to the market." And I just thought, oh, I could become a vegetarian overnight.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, as you said, that essence was there, and it was just, oh my God, was it heaven? We both looked at each other and went, okay, this is heaven. This is why we came to Aix-en-Provence. Okay, forget about the singing. It's about the eating right now.
Yeah. So, Harolyn, can you walk us through the trajectory of your opera career? Like, what were some of the highlights? And I'm sure that there were some challenges that you faced along the way. Can you give us a little picture of what that was like for you?
Well, I'm going to go back a little ways because my career really started on Broadway. I came to New York City and I was in West Side Story. And it was such an incredible experience because I had the opportunity. It was the 25th anniversary of West Side Story. And it was the first time they had done a production of West Side Story on Broadway in 25 years. So it was an opportunity to work with the original collaborators, the majority of them. So that's really where my career started. And from there, I made the transition into opera basically because the Broadway scene was changing and there was more popular music. The essence was becoming more contemporary instead of golden age. And I was realizing then I wasn't getting any work. And it was through my best girlfriend. And I looked at her, I said, what am I going to do? I'm not getting any work. And she said, well, you have a master's in voice performance. Why don't you audition for apprenticeship programs? And so literally, I'm looking at her like, apprenticeship programs? What are you talking about? Basically auditioning for different apprenticeship programs started that aspect of the career. And I was in Chicago for a year. It was an incredible experience, but it was absolutely challenging. And coming from Broadway and all of a sudden being in this, totally immersed in this opera world and learning the languages, the style, you're performing nonstop. And because you're performing during the day, because you have your own assignments and then you're covering through the season. From the Chicago program, I was one of 4 selected to go to the Met auditions, and I won the Met auditions that year. And so I would say that was a turning point. When I walked on that stage at the Met, and I had to open the beginning of the program on stage by myself.
Wow.
I opened the first half and the second half, singing Mozart by myself. And it was years later, I asked Joan Dornaman, I said, why did you do that to me? And she said, because I knew you could do it. I'm like, what? I mean, I've never walked on this stage before in my life. And so I'm out there by myself opening the program. And but it was that moment. That I thought, I remember sitting on that stage and I thought, I'm home.
We have a lot of our listeners who reinventing themselves, their careers, moving either from, singing to teaching to speech pathology or vice versa. And it can be stressful. And you kind of spoke to that a little bit. How did you cope with the stressors of just the urgency and recognizing that I have to pivot? How did you cope with that at that time?
Um, I would have to say I coped with it. Um, I moved to Chicago not knowing anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I found a support group there. And some people were, I would say the majority of the people were not associated with the opera company. Or I shouldn't say that, some people were, but I have friends outside and I have friends who were not in the opera company per se, but they were opera lovers. And those people really became my support system. And
Nice.
I will have to say, my family,
Mm-hmm.
and I will have to say, God.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was many a night I would sit there going, why am I here? Why am I here? Is this the right thing for me to do? And and somehow he just led me on the path. He just led me on the path because I will have to say, it was a steep learning curve.
Yeah.
But I think what was beneficial for me, because everyone else was, I didn't come to the opera world until my late 20s. Most of the people in the program were just getting out of school. But I think it was beneficial for me. I had been in the world of work. I knew what it was doing 8 shows a week. I had I knew what it was, how to negotiate contracts. I had learned all this in the 2 years of being on Broadway. So there was a lot I realized that I knew about the business. I always tell my kids, it's called show business. And sometimes we only think about the show and not the business.
Mm.
So a lot of things that I had learned through that, being on Broadway. But it was interesting. I look back upon it. I never quite followed the mold. I was always going, well, yeah, that's great, but could we do this instead?
I love that.
And they're going, well, Harolyn, yeah, but let's think about it this way. Well, no, when we want our artists to be here and they're working on their roles. And I said, but yeah, I just got an opportunity to go to sing with Minnesota orchestras, to sing, West Side Story and sing Maria. Well, we don't, you have to learn your music. Well, I can take my music with me. I promise you, I can do both.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always kind of pushing things out, going, well, no, can we think of this a different way?
I love that. One of the things they talk about with my singers is, you have to advocate for yourself and your vision because nobody's going to see what you can see. And
Absolutely.
sometimes, you're told like, no, let's do it this way. Or, it, and I always tell them that old saying of, closed doors don't necessarily mean that they're locked.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Push on them a little bit.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm always pushing and knocking a little bit. And, my father gave me a wonderful concept. He said, Harolyn, it's not always going through the front door. You can go through the back door, but you know exactly where your goals are.
Nice.
To get to the front door.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think so often we tell our kids, well, you got to be on Broadway. You have to, you have to be at the Metropolitan Opera. There are so many wonderful companies and organizations out here. Everything leads to the next step. The thing is, how do you go out there and refine your craft? And refining your craft means taking each of those steps along the way to where you get to the point where you walk on the stage and you go, I'm home. I did a lot of things before walking on that stage at the Met.
It's also not just your craft though, right? Like people talk a lot now about soft skills and how they open up doors for you, like your interpersonal interactions
Mhm,
and things like that. Did you
mhm.
find that those kind of soft skills were important when you were trying to
Oh,
reinvent yourself?
right, very much so, very much so. Because what you don't realize is that with each opportunity, you're meeting a new group of people. And with each opportunity, you want to walk in there being prepared, being collegial, and and just doing your work well.
Mhm.
And that often will speak for yourself. Kindness goes a long way.
Mhm.
I remember recently I was doing a speech at NYU, and we were talking about that. And I said to the students, I said, look to the left and look to the right, because that person to the right of you might be the director who's going to hire you. The person to the left of you might be the administrator who's going to hire you.
Mhm.
Kindness goes a long way.
Yes. Yes, and to a certain degree, we have to compete with each other, but there's no room for malice.
No, no, absolutely not. I always tell this story about, again, I'll go back to Chicago. And we had what we call the apprentices, but we had the ensemble members. And I was working on two different operas at the same time. And there was the ensemble member, lovely girl, beautiful voice, who was working on the role, and she was going to cover me. So I realized I was I was absolutely exhausted. Okay, and I walked into the head of the program. I said, Dr. Shannon, um, could she possibly do that role? And he said, well, she's an ensemble member. We really think you should be doing it. I said, I have no problem. I really do not have a problem. She knows the role. She's ready to go. I said, please let her do it. Because in my heart, I knew it. I knew at that point she needed validation.
Oh my goodness.
And she had put in the work. And she needed the validation, I'm sorry, to say, yes, I can do this. And so she did it. She did a fabulous job. I was so happy, so thrilled for her. And she said, thank you. I said, no, you don't need to thank me. I thank you because you did it.
I mean, that speaks a lot of what it is to embody confidence, because that idea of being able to share space,
Yes,
I
yes.
think that that's a big thing. And you just perfectly illustrated something that we talk about here on the podcast. And Geneva and I've talked about this a million times
Mm-hmm.
privately, is this idea of, yes, there can be competition, but collaboration is so powerful. And this
Oh,
idea of we lift as we climb. You
absolutely.
don't, like, there's room for all of us to move forward
Yes.
and to be inspired by the people ahead, and to drag the people who are just a little bit behind, drag them up with us. And thank
Absolutely.
you for sharing that. I think that's something that we can all spend a little time pondering. I think that that's
Yeah, yeah. I think it's something that we talked about, Christian.
yeah.
There is space for everyone.
Mhm.
That has always been my mantra. There is space for everyone because I think everyone has something important to say.
That's it.
We just give them the space to do it, you
Exactly.
know?
Yes, and I think those soft skills really help your career to be sustainable because the same people that you help one day or you encourage one day, they might be looking out for you the next day.
Well, it happened recently. Literally
Yeah.
happened recently to me. Exactly that. One of my students,
Wow.
she said, I just recommended you for something. And I
Amazing.
went, thank you so much. Funny you should say that, Geneva. That just happened this week. And
Yes.
that meant the world to me. That meant the world to me. I tell my students there are challenges doing this career, but it's something that you said earlier, Kristen, about finding the delight in those challenges.
Mhm.
what do you learn from those challenges? In the middle of it, you can't see it sometimes, very difficult. But when you look back, you go, I'm grateful for those challenges.
They're not for nothing.
No.
They don't return void, there's something there. Well, speaking of, singers supporting singers or
Mhm.
professionals supporting professionals, there was an article in the New York Times a while back, and you spoke warmly about working with Pavarotti, and
Yeah.
you had mentioned that he shared some singing advice, that he had given you some tips, and we have to ask because we're curious, but also for any aspiring singers listening, do you recall any wisdom or encouragement that he passed on to you?
I think with Luciano, it was basically just being on stage with him, just watching him work,
Mhm.
the freedom that he had in his voice it was literally exquisite. I remember, hearing it for the first time, and I literally missed my entrance because I just sat there and went, "Oh my God, that is truly the most beautiful voice I have ever heard in my life," and totally missed my entrance, right? And but just how he was able to give you this incredible legato line with the text being so present and so fresh, and using that text to really describe everything he wanted to give you vocally.
Wow.
That was just amazing to watch as a young singer. I mean, I heard people say that. Your teachers keep saying it to you, keep saying it, but really to hear it night after night
Mm.
was a lesson in itself. And I think I think the biggest thing I learned from him also was to have fun. I mean, I really loved doing that role because of Luciano. Luciano allowed me to have fun. And not every role is like that. But it was something about the chemistry between the two of us with that role that allowed me to have so much fun. But that was really that was what I really learned from him. It didn't give me a voice lesson. No, the voice lesson was just watching him every day
Mhm.
on that stage, every performance.
So you had mentioned earlier in our conversation today about the idea that everybody has something to give, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So in season one of our podcast, Marsha Lesser was here,
Hmm.
our lovely Marsha, and she
Yes.
some of her thoughts on the struggle that singers are facing and that she's seeing singers deal with to
Mm-hmm.
fully what she calls take up space. And then, Harolyn, in our recent chat, you had mentioned noticing that singers were shrinking when they walk into a space and almost like they're afraid to take bold artistic risks. And you mentioned the issue of vulnerability in singing. And so I
Mm-hmm.
kind of wanted to ask you, what are you seeing and why do you think this is emerging? What's going on in the way you're looking at it? Mhm.
I'm seeing more of that in my students who, in the last couple of years, have had to go through the pandemic. That the sense of their space became confined during the pandemic. And now to come out and really embrace that space, it can be frightening at times because that means you have to open up. And I think when the world shuts down and everything is shutting down around you, in a way, you kind of shut down. And I think the other thing is not being in the room with everyone, not having that one on one contact. So I find that often, they come into the room and they're slouching.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how is this manifesting in what you're seeing and hearing?
I find it that they're slouching quite a bit. And I have to say to them, I said, that's going to be very difficult singing. Your sound is not going to be able to come out. And what are you doing to your body? You're closing yourself. off to your audience. I had a discussion with a student last week. I said to her, okay, you have the technical aspect of this. We've gone to the technical. What is your story? What do you want the conversation to be between you and your audience? And she looked at me and she said, I haven't quite thought about that because I was thinking of the interpretation or my intent as being more inward. And I thought, okay, but if you've got to go out and you've got to communicate something to your audience, she said, well, that means I have to be vulnerable. I said, but you're taking them on a journey with you. Because when we say vulnerability, that means you open yourself up and people are going to criticize. And when I said to her, you're taking them on a journey with you, whatever your intention is, you're sharing that journey with them and they're going to respond back. And she went, oh. I said, okay, does that help you? And she said, yes, just for the mechanism of singing, right? It's so difficult to get your sound out if you're all curled up in a ball.
Right.
I said, just the technical aspect of it, okay?
I think that's interesting. You said something I've never really considered, that idea of if the framework of understanding performance is like, oh, this is an internal thing that I'm experiencing, without then also calibrating for the audience that's with you, that's going to change things both mechanically, emotionally, expressively. That's an interesting piece of the puzzle.
Yes.
That it's not just internal.
That's exactly. Because the bottom line is we have to communicate. That's why I would think most of us are doing this, is because we have found through singing we can communicate. I'll be honest with you. I literally did not find my voice until I was able to sing.
Wow.
I was shy, and it was my fourth grade teacher who said to me, you have a voice, take a good breath and sing. And she gave me some of the best advice. I used to say to her, because in my mind, it was always, I can't. And one day she looked at me, she said, can't is not a word in our vocabulary. That day, as a 9-year-old, I went, yes, I can. So I had the mantra long before Obama. Okay. And at that moment, and every time I would say, she said, she would look at me. I said, yes, I can.
So just to follow up to that question, the question, one of the things that Kristen and I talk about sometimes is who gets to take up space, because as for example, in church music, as churches are streaming their services, there's a push for more professionalism in their music programs, but you have to wonder about, non-seasoned or developing singers or musicians who have something to say but are not as polished with it. Or what about aging voices in amateur or professional performance who might be told, now it's time for you to sit down, but they still have something to say. So the question that we often talk about is, what's the criteria for being able to take up space and share your voice and to communicate? And who gets to decide who is allowed to take up space, do you think?
Something, I think we're so busy worrying about perfectionism. Instead of, yes. And you know what? We're so worried about perfectionism that we are losing the sight of really communicating about the realness of the experience. I've listened to a lot of perfect singers, but they don't move me. I want you to move me. And sometimes I tell people there's beauty in the imperfection. But we're told in our society that we have to be perfect. Everything has to be in place. Perfection becomes boring.
Well, and I think also if the, you know, I think of the singer who's about to take that breath in, and on that breath in, if it's, I have to prove my right to be here, or
Yes.
I have to get this right so that it's, it's such, it's such a pull to please this external thing that then
Mm-hmm.
we lose contact with the truth of what's really happening in the moment, the truth of what
Exactly.
the body is even sharing, because we can become blind to those resonances and those feelings that tell us something. And that and even on that breath in, that's a very different breath than if we were to breathe in and it's about, what do I have to say through this? I mean, one thing that we talk
Mm-hmm.
about a lot here is the idea of like, what do, when I look at this material, what does it say? And then how does my voice say it? So it's like, what
Mm-hmm.
do I see and how do I say it?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very, that's different, even on that initial breath, and then certainly everything that comes after it. So I think it's an important thing for us as professionals talking to young professionals, or to young singers, or just, I'm going to take out the word young, just singers, is letting them be in the space and let it be
Mm-hmm.
less about perfectionism and more about, what do you see? What do you want to say? Because what you see through this material might be different than what I would.
Absolutely.
And
Can
as an audience member, if you don't show me, I might miss it.
exactly, exactly. And sometimes, I mean, sometimes I just want to say, can we just go back to the joy of singing?
Yes.
Yes.
Can we just go back to the sheer joy of singing that we all started in the beginning? You know, I have to tell myself that. I have to tell myself that, a million times,
Mm-hmm.
a million times, going, okay, okay, just stop, take a breath and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Just enjoy it.
Yes.
And that's hard to do when we're trying to be note perfect, pitch, everything has to be perfect.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, Geneva, what do you think? What do you think?
As far as taking up space,
Yeah, taking up the space. I mean, because, yeah, what do
I
you think?
think I think we need, as far as communication, we need the perspectives of everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're only getting the trained and polished people, that's a very small slice of the population, and oftentimes it's a slice of the population that comes with privilege, the privilege of education, right?
No,
And
sir.
there are other people who might not have access to those things, but they still have something to say that can benefit other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone has a message to share, I think we should allow them to share it. Even if it's not, spick and span polished. There is so much room for spick and span polish. We all love beauty for sure. And it's not to say there isn't beauty in the less polished performance. But if someone has something to say, why should we edit that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I say to Kristen, why are we editing Black women, for example, or why are we, silencing less educated people or people of lower socioeconomic status?
Mm-hmm.
Someone has something to say.
Mm-hmm.
Give them the opportunity to say it.
Exactly.
I mean, my goodness. I mean, I have been in concerts or places where I've just sat there and I just went, oh my goodness, listen, it's not it's not trained, but
Right.
what that person is saying to me literally moves me to tears.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just as valid.
Absolutely.
Well, I remember one time I was in a church service and there was somebody who was singing, and there were some, let's say, creative notes coming out. uh, Maybe not perfectly according to the well-tempered scale. And somebody kind of nudged me. They knew I was a singer and a voice teacher, and they were like, so what would you do to fix that? I was like, hold up. I was like, you need to stop and look at the spirit of this person. Like,
Mm-hmm.
look at the spirit of who they are and what they're trying to share with us. There's something so much more important going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I'm a technician, so I do love the idea of us sculpting our skill, because I think that the more responsive we can get the instrument to be, the easier it is for us to say what we want to say. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not knocking, uh, craft.
Right.
And at the same time, there's something more transcendent than craft. Craft serves the spirit. And I think that the spirit of that person and what they have to say, that's the most important thing. And
Well
then we put
said.
craft in its place.
Exactly. Well said. Well said. Well said. Yeah, it's yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's something I have to say to my students all the time. I I said you're allowed to fail.
Yeah.
You're allowed to fail. I say even tell them I want you to fail,
Wow.
because that's where you're going to learn your biggest lessons.
Yeah.
Well, and without that permission, you're not going to take the chances and the risks that you need to take
Yeah. Yeah.
to make
Yeah.
that impact.
This
Exactly.
it reminds me of how like Steven Tyler, in the end of Dream On, when he's doing those really high notes, like he doesn't do them as well as other people can do them, but everybody loves him doing them, And even for professional singers, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be iconic. It has to be authentic. Let me put it that way.
Well,
That's a lighter
some,
load to bear.
I think people talk about Aretha singing at the Kennedy Center honors, right?
Mhm.
And I remember being there, and my God, it was the emotional statement that she was giving us. Yes, singing was wonderful, but what she was giving us emotionally, we were just. And at the end, what was wonderful was that the entire audience just stood up at once. It was that everybody was feeling the same thing. She walked out that night, and she gave us so much soul and so much love that night, that when she finished that last song, the audience just stood up as one and started screaming.
Wow. Speaking of icons and being iconic,
Mm-hmm.
at one point in your career, it may have been difficult for you to take up space as you were often linked with Kathleen Battle. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you were able to define yourself as a singer?
I just really basically, did my repertoire. I mean, she did the same repertoire, but I was able to take up my space because we're different individuals,
Nice.
bringing different experiences.
Mhm.
Honoring her, because honoring Riri Grist, and realizing along the way. I mean, I think every young singer wants to imitate someone, but then you eventually find what is your voice, and that's going to be based, because every voice is different.
Mhm.
Even though there are similarities, every voice is different, and we have different experiences. So I realized that for me, it was about bringing those experiences, so that I had the space that was for me, which would be different from Kathleen, which would be different from Riri Grist, because in the beginning of my career, it wasn't Kathleen Battle that people compared me to, it was Riri Grist.
Ah,
People think it was Kathleen, but it was Riri. To the point that, years later, when I was in Germany, I called up Riri, and I said to her, I would like to meet with you. And she said, well, I don't have time to give you a lesson. I said, I'm not interested in a lesson. I just want to meet you because every time I walk into that room, they says, you remind me so much of Riri Grist. And, we were built the same way. And we look so much alike. And Riri was the girl she was the person originally sang West Side Story. And then 25 years later, I come back and I sing West Side Story. So we had this trajectory. But we were different. We were different. And I think every singer is going to be compared to someone else. And everyone finds their way to find their space. And for me, it was just saying, I love Kathy. I adore Kathy. Oh my God. I mean, incredible artist. But this is Harolyn, and I'm going to bring my experience to the space.
Taking up space, to me, as we're talking, it's really hitting me that a big piece of this is extreme ownership of your identity, extreme ownership of your voice, of your perspective and your experiences. Yeah. So I'm hearing you as you're talking about, stepping onto these stages and singing with these other just highly esteemed artists. And and maybe people were trying to make comparisons, but it sounds like you had some boundedness of like, I know who I am. Is that how it felt to you?
Yes. I mean, I think as with every young artist, in the beginning, you question that until you start to go out there and you start doing it. And my experience, for example, I came from a musical theater background coming into this opera world. And there weren't so many people doing that. And so all that experience I brought with me. And so but I learned that in Chicago. I learned how to take ownership. So, I mean, that's what was so great about that program, that I walked into the program not knowing who I was in this particular world. I knew who I was in the other world, but not know who I was in this world, and whether I even wanted to do this, want to even do anything with opera. But by the end, I had taken ownership. I just said, well, this is what I'm going to do. I know what I have to work on to better myself as a singer and as an artist. And I have to take ownership. So I would say Chicago taught me that. Really taught me that. I tell my students, I said, when you walk on that stage, who's facing the audience? It's you. The conductor is back to the audience. The orchestra is in the pit. The director's gone. The choreographer's gone. It's just you.
That leads me to another question, is then what is the role of the singer? Because all of the people you just mentioned, the composer and the lyricist and the directors and the critics and then the obligations of attention, like all of those have a say. And so how does the singer then face that audience and in their own skin? How do they find their voice in it? So what do you think is the role of the singer?
I think the role of the singer is to interpret what the composer has put on that page. That is my job. With the experiences that I've had with my life, with my, all those experiences, but it is my duty, I feel, to honor what the composer has put on the page. So when he says to me, why do I sing a dynamic of piano? That is my job to figure it out from the text he has given me, from the music he has given me. It is to honor the composer.
That's beautiful.
So it sounds like you are giving us a little taste, perhaps, I don't know, about what you think an agentic practice might be. So moving into our final segment, we usually feature a practical technique or concept or practice that listeners can apply to help increase their vocal agency and freedom. Have you thought about a tool or a strategy that singers can use to facilitate freedom, perhaps in interpreting what the composer has put on the paper?
Well, I would always say, first of all, go back to the text, because that's what the composer, first and foremost, he starts with the text. And he's giving you, through the music, exactly how he wants you to express that text. And I don't care if you're doing popular music, you're doing musical theater, every genre. That's what makes us so different and why we're able to move people. I tell my students, we have words. Words move people. And so I go back to the text. I say, go back to the text. Then go back to see how he's colored that text by your dynamics, by tempo marking, by the directions, the guideposts. And that comes, listen, you have to have the technical skills, first and foremost, to take on that next step. Then what is my intention so that I can build my character? Then I'm able to fly. I'm able to perform.
We're so grateful to have had you on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. This has been fun.
So in this episode, we discussed coping with the stressors of reinventing yourself, how soft skills can help sustain a singing career, and taking up space as a singer with Harolyn Blackwell. You can find out more about Harolyn Blackwell's amazing career in today's episode notes. And if you enjoyed today's content, please don't forget to subscribe to the Agentic Voice Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Also, don't forget to leave a review so that we know what you do like and don't like. Your engagement helps our podcast grow. Until next time, take care.